Donald Trump is, at best, being played by the Russians like the proverbial $2 banjo. Donald Trump is, at worst, the spokesmodel of the Russians in this country, fronting for their dictator, Vladimir Putin. There is now evidence of this, not just Trump's advocacy of Putin's dubious poll approval numbers, nor his admiration for his leadership style, nor his excuses for the opponents and reporters jailed or hurt or worse on Putin's watch. There is now evidence of this, and it does not even require invoking the name of the shadowy investor Carter Page, nor the Russian bureaucrat believed to be in charge of his government's efforts to intervene in our presidential election. This is much simpler and much stupider, and it reinforces my oldest theory that the democracy survives not as much because of the efforts and sacrifice of the noble to preserve it, as it does because of the sloppiness and imbecility of those who seek to destroy it. On October 21, 2015, Newsweek printed a story called Benghazi Biopsy by a very good writer and reporter named Kurt Eichenwald. Benghazi, the lone obsession fully shared by the Republicans and the right wing and the alt-right and Donald Trump. Eichenwald wrote, "One important point has been universally acknowledged by the 9 previous reports about Benghazi. The attack was almost certainly preventable. Clinton was in charge of the State Department, and it failed to protect U.S. personnel at an American consulate in Libya. If the GOP wants to raise that as a talking point against her, it is legitimate." On Monday of this week, the 10th, Sputnik, an online news and radio service created by one of Russia's government-controlled news agencies, posted what it called a major revelation from the emails stolen by WikiLeaks from the hacked account of Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. Sputnik claimed that in one Podesta email, Sidney Blumenthal, the other shared obsession of the whole spectrum of right-wingers, had secretly written that Benghazi was preventable. Sputnik claimed Sidney Blumenthal had written this: "One important point that has been universally acknowledged by 9 previous reports about Benghazi, the attack was almost certainly preventable. Clinton was in charge of the State Department, and it failed to protect U.S. personnel at an American consulate in Libya. If the GOP wants to raise that as a talking point against her, it is legitimate," said Blumenthal. It's exactly what Kurt Eichenwald wrote in Newsweek a year ago, minus one use of the article "the." Otherwise, it is word for word. What Kurt Eichenwald wrote, WikiLeaks stole out of John Podesta's emails, and Sputnik published as something Sidney Blumenthal said. Well, that's a hell of a coincidence. Of course, it isn't a coincidence. A Blumenthal email included those words because Blumenthal was emailing Eichenwald's story. He didn't say them, he didn't write them, yet they go from Podesta's hacked email account to a Russian propaganda site and are then presented to the world as a blockbuster confession from Sidney Blumenthal. A fake blockbuster designed to alter the outcome of our presidential election, brought to you by WikiLeaks and the propaganda arm of the Russian government. But it gets worse than that, and it gets scarier than that. And here is where Donald Trump is either knowingly serving as an agent for the Russians, spreading disinformation, or he's just a moron reading stuff he doesn't understand that somebody found on the internet. Trump, addressing a crowd at Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, hours after the Sputnik misrepresentation went online on Monday of this week. So Blumenthal writes a quote, "This just came out a little while ago, I have to tell you this. One important point has been universally acknowledged by the 9 previous reports about Benghazi. This is Sidney Blumenthal, the only one she was talking to. She wasn't talking to Ambassador Stevens, even those 600 calls. Probably desperation. The attack was almost certainly preventable. Clinton was in charge of the State Department, and it failed to protect the United States personnel at an American consulate in Libya," Trump said. He meant Benghazi. If the GOP wants to raise that as a talking point against her, it is legitimate. In other words, he's now admitting they could have done something about Benghazi. This just came out a little while ago. Trump was reading the paragraph from the Kurt Eichenwald article in Newsweek, falsely and obviously turned by the Russians into a fake Sidney Blumenthal quote and shoved under this idiot Trump's nose. He read it aloud, and the crowd started chanting, "Lock her up." Donald Trump, speeches infused with propaganda from the Russian government. But why should you think that, and not that it could be a coincidence or just the typical sloppy thinking of a slob like Trump? Because of a very strange man named Roger Stone. Roger Stone is a longtime Trump confidant, and he had been a formal advisor to this campaign. Stone tweets on Sunday, October 2, quote, "Wednesday, @Hillary Clinton is done, #WikiLeaks. The next day, I have total confidence that at WikiLeaks and my hero Julian Assange will educate the American people soon, hashtag lock her up. But neither of those is a smoking gun. In fact, Assange's much-touted news conference became instead a late-night web video appearance at which he sold WikiLeaks books. And besides that, it's not like Stone actually specifically referenced John Podesta or anything. Oh, right, he did. On August 21st, Stone had tweeted, "Trust me, it will soon Podesta's time in the barrel." Eichenwald writes it. WikiLeaks hacks Podesta's email. Stone menaces Podesta. Stone promises Clinton is done thanks to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks produces an email. Eichenwald's article is misidentified by the Russians as something Sidney Blumenthal said, and Trump reads it to the red meat crowd hours later like a good puppet. And it sure looks like Stone knew it was all going to happen. 6 weeks ago he knew. Only he was too stupid to keep his mouth shut, and the Russians were too stupid to realize that a guy who really wrote the quote would recognize his own words when he read them. And on top of everything else, Trump then complained because it was not the October surprise he had been promised. Wednesday, 9:46 a.m. Very little pickup by the dishonest media of incredible information provided by WikiLeaks. So dishonest, rigged system. True, rigged. Only the system in question is Vladimir Putin's. Democracy survives not as much because of the efforts and sacrifice of the noble to preserve it as it does because of the sloppiness and imbecility of those who seek to destroy it. Kindly pray that this continues to be true. That's the closer. I'm Keith Olbermann. Watch this space.